Hey guy, welcome back to Sleep Among Titans, where we drift through strange and quiet corners of the past, perfect for listening before you sleep. Tonight our journey takes us to one of the quietest and perhaps darkest of those corners. In a stone room deep beneath a sleeping city, a man is finishing his day's work. He moves with a quiet focus, his hands steady, his motions practiced. He is cleaning his tools. But these are not the tools of a carpenter nor a blacksmith. The wood is worn smooth by countless hands, and the steel holds a cold, patient gleam that seems to drink the torchlight from the air. Have you ever wondered about the man who performs the tasks no one else dares to? He is a phantom in the public square, a necessary monster whose existence is a whispered secret. By day the town fears him. By night they need him to uphold their laws. He is the final brutal punctuation at the end of justice. But when he returns to this silent room, when the iron doors are barred and the city's judgment is done, who does he become? What does he think about in these quiet hours? Does he reflect on the grim nature of his craft, or is it merely a job, a heavy inherited burden? When he looks at his own hands, does he see the hands of a father and a husband, or only the instruments of pain and finality? If you could peel back the layers of fear and infamy, what kind of man would you find beneath the black hood tonight? We step past the legends and into the shadows. We are going to explore the life of the one man who was permitted to break society's greatest taboo. Before we begin, tell us in the comments below, what is the one question you would ask him? Join us as we follow this silent figure through his world of stone, steel and solitude to truly understand what it meant to be the medieval executioner. A single solitary bell might chime once in the far-off distance. Narrator. To understand the man in that stone room, the man we call Dietrich, we first have to understand the world that created him. It was a world of rigid order, a world obsessed with law, honor, and one's proper place in the grand scheme of things, and the executioner's place. Well, that was a paradox wrapped in a contradiction, served with a side of public shunning. It's one thing to be the monster in a story, but what if you were the monster on the city's payroll? In the intricate social tapestry of the Holy Roman Empire, people were divided into honourable and dishonourable professions, the ehrliche und unehrliche Leute. The honourable were your craftsmen, your merchants, your bakers. The dishonourable, well, that category included a motley crew of millers, bathhouse keepers, actors, and at the very bottom of that list, glowing with a grim sword of infamy, was the executioner, the Scharfrichter, the sharp judge. This wasn't just a matter of public opinion, it was law. Dietrich was a vital employee of the state, a living instrument of its highest court. Yet he was legally considered tainted. His touch, the touch of his family, even the touch of his shadow as it passed over you, was thought to carry a stain. He was a walking, breathing vessel of civic impurity. Imagine applying for a job where the contract states that while you are essential for the maintenance of order, your key performance indicator is how effectively everyone avoids you at the annual town fair. It was the universe's cruelest joke to be both indispensable and untouchable. This taint, this Anrichtigkeit, followed him everywhere. He couldn't drink from the same tavern stein as an honourable man. He couldn't be buried in the same consecrated ground. If he were to enter a church, he had to use a separate entrance to stand in a designated lonely spot in the back, lest his presence curdle the holy water. His life was a masterclass in social distancing centuries before the term was ever coined. So if the job was so despised, why would anyone ever take it? The answer, as it so often is complicated. It involves economics necessity and a complete lack of other options. For one, while the job paid in shame, it also paid in coin, and not just coin. The executioner's compensation was a bizarre, often grim benefits package. Think about the perks of your own job, a decent healthcare plan, a retirement fund, maybe a company car. Dietrich's perks were different. He was often entitled to the clothes of the condemned, a strange and morbid form of inheritance. He had the right to any stray animal found within the city walls, which is why many executioners were the only ones in town with a particularly motley collection of dogs, and a surprisingly well-fed donkey. This donkey, by the way, was often his only reliable companion on trips to other towns, a fellow creature who thankfully did not care about the legal status of its owner. There was more. He was in many places entitled to a strange form of tax, a professional courtesy from the other merchants. A handful of vegetables from every stall he passed in the market. A scoop of flour from the baker given with averted eyes. A piece of meat from the butcher, often a specific, less desirable, cut a silent reminder of his status. Can you picture the sheer awkwardness of that transaction? the butcher, his hands covered in honourable blood from a pig, carefully setting aside a piece of offal for the man whose hands were covered in the dishonourable blood of a human. It's the kind of dark, silent comedy that writes itself. This strange economic reality leads to another question. If you're shunned by everyone, how do you build a life? Who do you marry? An executioner couldn't very well court the baker's daughter. He was lucky if she didn't make a sign to ward off evil when he walked by. And so by necessity the profession became a family business, the ultimate family business that no one actually wanted to be in. Executioners married the daughters of other executioners. Sons inherited the heavy sword and the heavier shame from their fathers. Over generations this created dynasties of executioners, sprawling family trees connected by a shared grim trade. They formed a network across Europe, a tight-knit community of outcasts who understood each other because no one else could. They would write letters sharing professional techniques, news of their children, and perhaps one imagines complaining about the local magistrates in the same way one might complain about a difficult boss. Dietrich's own father had been the city's executioner and his father before him. He hadn't chosen this life. He was born into it. The scent of oiled steel and the weight of public scorn were his birthright. But the strange paradoxes didn't end there. In a twist of irony so sharp it could draw blood, this figure of death was often also a figure of healing. Who in the city knew the human body better than the man who was professionally required to break it? An executioner had to be a reluctant anatomist. He knew where every bone was, how every joint moved, and what it took to keep a person hovering on the precise edge of life and death. Because of this dark knowledge, people would come to him in secret under the cover of night. Not for judgment, but for help. A dislocated shoulder, a badly broken leg, the town's official sawbones might be too squeamish or unskilled. But Dietrich, he knew exactly how to set a bone with a firm, practiced grip. He was in the most bizarre way imaginable the city's most knowledgeable and most feared physical therapist. And of course there were the darker side hustles. The world was steeped in superstition, and the body of a condemned sinner held a powerful morbid magic. There was a grim market for the tools of his trade. The rope from a hanging was thought to bring good luck at cards. A sliver of bone could be used in an amulet. And most famously there was the hand of glory, the preserved hand of a hanged man believed to have the power to paralyze all who looked at it, a perfect tool for a thief. Dietrich likely received requests for such things. For a man trying to feed his family in a world that reviled him a few extra coins for a grim artifact. Well, who could blame him for occasionally dipping into the world of macabre supply and demand, waste not, want not, was a principle that took on a particularly dreadful meaning in his profession. All these factors, the legal taint, the economic oddities, the inherited shame, the secret knowledge coalesced to define his physical space. The executioner's house was never in the cosy centre of town, it was always on the periphery. Sometimes it was built directly into the city wall, a home and a fortress in one. Often it stood in the shadow of the gallows or near the charnel fields where the bodies of the unclaimed were disposed of. His address was a constant physical reminder of his marginal status. He lived on the edge of the map, on the border between the world of the living and the realm of the judged. His home was his sanctuary, a place where he could for a moment take off the invisible, suffocating mask of his profession. It was a fortress against the world's whispers and its cold stares. But what about the other fortress, the one he worked in? The one made of colder stone and deeper shadows. To truly know the man, we must understand the space that defined his labour. We must now follow him through another door, a much heavier one. Are you ready to step inside his workshop? The door is shut. The world with its judgments and its jittery, nervous energy is locked out. Or perhaps we have just been locked in. The air changes instantly. Outside it was the crisp, cold air of a city night. In here the air is heavy, still and cellar cool. It carries the ancient scent of damp earth, of cold stone and something else. A faint metallic tang like old coins or dried blood, a smell so old it has become a permanent part of the stone itself. But the most powerful presence in this room is not a smell but a sound, or rather the lack of one. This is not the peaceful quiet of a library, nor the sleepy quiet of a bedroom. This is a pressed down silence. A weighted silence, thick and tangible, as if the sheer density of past sorrows has physically compressed the air, squeezing all the noise out of it. It's a silence that listens back, and if you listen closely enough, what stories does it tell? It whispers not of screams, those are too brief, too fleeting, but of the long agonizing hours of quiet in between. The murmur of a desperate prayer, the the ragged sound of breathing, the rhythmic drip of water counting down the moments. This room is a library of forgotten sounds, and Dietrich is its sole silent librarian. As our eyes adjust to the gloom lit only by the single torch Dietrich carries, the shape of his workshop begins to resolve itself from the shadows. You might expect a scene of grim chaos, a madman's lair littered with the grim evidence of his trade. You would be wrong. The first and most startling impression of this space is one of order, almost fanatical order. Dietrich was above all else a professional, and professionals, regardless of their trade, are organised. He was perhaps the unwitting father of workplace efficiency, the dark pioneer of decluttering one's emotional and physical space. The room is a large vaulted chamber, the ceiling so high that the torchlight barely reaches it, leaving the upper reaches in a permanent twilight. The floor is packed earth, worn smooth and hard over centuries. Along one wall, a series of iron hooks are embedded in the stone, but they are empty. The whips and scourges that might hang from them are not on display. Instead, they are carefully coiled the leather treated with oil and stored in a heavy wooden chest that sits against the far wall. The famous rack the bock is not standing menacingly in the centre of the room. It is folded, a marvel of grim engineering, and leaned against the wall, covered respectfully by a thick canvas sheet, like a piece of furniture awaiting delivery. The centre of the room is dominated by a single sturdy table of dark-scarred wood and a single equally sturdy stool. Both are scrubbed clean. There are no stains. There is no clutter. This is not a chamber of horrors. This is a craftsman's workshop. And what of the tools of that craft? They are not scattered about. On a long stone shelf sits a neat row of objects arranged by size. The infamous Daumenschrauben, the thumb screws polished and gleaming. The heavier, more complex Beinschrauben, or leg irons, often called the Spanish boot. Their intricate mechanisms of screw and plate looking like some strange industrial puzzle. Each one is clean. Each one is ready. There is no malice in their presentation. There is only the quiet readiness of a carpenter's chisels or a surgeon's scalpels. It begs the question, is this obsessive tidiness a mark of simple professional pride, or is it a desperate daily ritual to keep the madness of his work at bay, to impose order on a space dedicated to imposing chaos on the human body? After all, nothing would be more unprofessional than a mechanical failure mid-interrogation. One imagines Dietrich in a quiet moment meticulously oiling the threads of a thumbscrew, his brow furrowed in concentration, annoyed that a bit of rust is compromising the device's smooth operation. It is the dry, absurd complaint of a dedicated specialist. This strange sense of domesticity in the heart of dread is what is most unsettling. It's the feeling that this place for Dietrich is normal. It is his 9 to 5, and like any long-held office, it has other more permanent inhabitants. Look closer. In the corners where the shadows are deepest, ancient spiderwebs hang like tattered grey flags. They are the room's oldest tapestries, and listen, that dripping sound. It comes from a spot where the vaulted ceiling weeps, a slow, steady and eternal leak. A single drop falls every few seconds into a shallow puddle, the plink, a lonely liquid clock. For Dietrich it is likely as familiar and ignorable as the ticking of a grandfather clock in a quiet house. And of course there were the rats. They were his unseen colleagues, his permanent residents who never paid rent. He knew their scurrying, scratching sounds, as well as he knew the creak of the rack. They were part of the ecosystem of this subterranean world. He held them in no affection, but he understood them. They were creatures of shadow of necessity. They were survivors, in that perhaps he felt a certain unspoken kinship. They were a reminder that even in this place of profound stillness and dread, life of a sort stubbornly went on. So this is Dietrich's domain. Not a pit of screaming chaos, but a place of quiet, ordered and lonely work. It reflects the man himself, compartmentalized, controlled and meticulously clean on the surface, containing a dark function within. The tidiness is his shield. The routine is his armor. By controlling every object in this room, from the smallest iron screw to the largest wooden lever, he asserts a fragile mastery over his own life. He is the king of this small stone kingdom. The stage is set. The workshop is clean, the air is still, the tools are ready. The silence is absolute, for now. But a workshop, no matter how tidy, is nothing without its work. A stage is nothing without its actors. And the deep, heavy silence of this room is not its natural state. It is merely the pause between breaths, the quiet before the story. Soon that heavy oak door will open again, Soon other footsteps will join Dietrich's on the packed earth floor. The silence is about to be broken. The only question is, by whom the silence of Dietrich's kingdom is broken? But it is not the sound of a desperate prisoner being dragged in. The footsteps that cross the threshold are heavy, confident and dry. They belong to the world above. First comes a magistrate, a man named Ulrich, whose fine wool cloak seems immediately out of place in the damp subterranean air. He carries a roll of parchment tied with a ribbon, holding it away from his body, as if to prevent the room's atmosphere from contaminating its official importance. Following him is a young clerk clutching a portable writing desk and a jar of ink. He has the weary put-upon expression of an intern on a particularly unpleasant assignment. Finally, 2 city guards, their faces impassive, their hands resting on the pommels of their swords. They all blink in the gloom, their noses wrinkling slightly at the scent of damp stone. They were not here for violence, they were here for a result. A piece of paper, a signature, a confession, and Dietrich. He was simply the highly specialized and deeply unsavory tool they were about to use. The magistrate Ulrich unrolls his parchment with a self-important crackle. Dietrich, he says, his voice a little too loud for the space. We have one for the question. A baker, name of Klaus, accused of heresy. He speaks of it with the flat procedural tone of a manager assigning a task. There is no emotion, no hint of the gravity of the words. Heresy was a word that could unravel a life, and here it was delivered like a weekly report. Dietrich simply nods. He has heard it all before. He had a mental catalogue of accusations, a grim Rolodex of human failings, heresy, theft, treason, witchcraft. To him they were just job titles for the unfortunate souls who ended up in his workshop. Bring him, Ulrich commands. Dietrich turns and walks toward a smaller, even heavier door at the back of the chamber. This short corridor leads to a few small windowless cells, the city's most secure holding pens. The sound of his key in the lock is loud and grating. When he opens the door, the man inside flinches. He is just a man, this Klaus the baker. Not a monster, not a demon. His hands, which should be covered in flour, are pale and trembling. His apron is stained. He looks less like a heretic and more like a man who has gotten terribly, terribly lost. Dietrich says nothing. He doesn't offer false comfort or threats. He simply stands aside, holding the door. That is his way. He is the ferryman, and this is the crossing. The guards step forward to flank the baker, but he walks on his own, his steps shuffling and uncertain. The short walk from the cell back to the main chamber is the longest walk of the baker's life. The only sound is the scrape of his worn leather shoes on the stone. It's a vulnerable human sound in a room built for inhuman things. They place Klaus on the sturdy stool in the centre of the room. He looks very small in the vast vaulted space. The scribe sets up his little desk, dips his quill in the ink and sighs. It's a sigh of pure bureaucratic boredom, as if to say, let's get this over with. I have other things to do. The ritual begins. It is always a ritual. Law even at its most brutal love ceremony. Magistrate Ulrich clears his throat and begins to read from his scroll. Klaus of the West Gate, you stand accused of spreading false and heretical doctrines, of questioning the articles of faith, and of leading others into sin and error. The words drone on, long and official, each syllable an iron nail being hammered into the baker's fate. Dietrich stands by his arms crossed. He is not listening to the words. He is observing the mechanics of the situation. He notes the slight tremor in the magistrate's hand, a sign of nervousness. He notes the way the scribe is already looking toward the door, impatient. It's a classic case of too many cooks in a very, very small kitchen of despair. They all want the result, but none of them want to be here. None except perhaps Dietrich, for whom this was simply here. When the charges are finally read, there is a pause. The dripping water marks the time. Do you confess to these charges? Ulrich asks, his voice attempting a tone of righteous authority. Klaus just shakes his head, whispering no. I am a good man. Ulrich looks at him, then nods curtly to Dietrich. Proceed with the first degree. This is the moment, the pivot point where procedure descends into pain. But there is no sudden burst of violence. Dietrich moves with the calm, unhurried efficiency of a man setting up a piece of equipment. He selects a few leather straps. He checks the buckles. He approaches the baker, who flinches and closes his eyes. There is the soft sound of the straps being buckled around the man's arms and torso, securing him to the stool. A low, protesting creak of wood as it settles under the new tension. A sharp intake of breath from Klaus, quickly suppressed. And that is all. The magistrate leans forward. Let us ask again. Did you not say on the Tuesday past that a man's conscience is a higher authority than the church silence? Only the baker's ragged breathing. Ulrich nods again to Dietrich. Dietrich moves to the shelf and picks up a thumbscrew. He holds it not like a weapon, but like a key. He walks back to the prisoner. He doesn't look at the man's face, but at his hand. He fits the device over the thumb, his movements precise and economical. The baker begins to pray a low, desperate murmur. The loudest sound in the room is the scratching of the scribe's quill, as he notes the prisoner's lack of a response. For the third time, Ulrich says, his voice tight with impatience, "Answer the question." He gives a sharp, almost imperceptible flick of his eyes toward Dietrich. Dietrich places his fingers on the handle of the screw. He gives it a single quarter turn. It makes only a tiny metallic click. A choked gasp escapes the baker's lips. "Yes," he whispers. The scribe's quill scratches. The accused admits to the first assertion. The process has begun. It is a terrible, quiet and methodical negotiation. A question, a silence, a nod, a click, a word, a scratch of the quill. It is not a chaotic frenzy of violence. It is a grim and ordered disassembly of a man's will. Dietrich is merely the technician, the operator of the machine. He applies the pressure as instructed, his face a mask of professional neutrality. He might as well be a miller adjusting his grindstones. Minutes stretch into an hour. The questions continue, the clicks continue. The whispered answers are duly recorded. The confession grows a rambling, incoherent document of pain and fear. Finally, the magistrate holds up a hand. He looks at the scribe's parchment, now half full of spidery ink. He seems satisfied. He has his result. "That will be sufficient," Ulrich declares. The guards unstrap the baker, who slumps forward half-conscious. They haul him to his feet and carry him back to his cell. The job is done. The magistrate rolls up his now precious document. The scribe, with a final relieved sigh, packs his things. They leave without another word to Dietrich, their footsteps quick and eager to find the clean air above. And once again, Dietrich is alone. The silence rushes back in to fill the space they left, but it's a different silence now. It's heavier. It carries the fresh memory of the last hour. He walks to the stool and picks up the thumbscrew. He looks at it for a moment before placing it back on the shelf in its precise spot. He begins his ritual. He wipes down the stool. He checks the straps. He sweeps the floor. He's resetting the stage, erasing the event, returning his workshop to its state of quiet, ordered readiness. His eyes fall upon a scrap of parchment the scribe dropped. A blot of ink, a half-formed word. This paper held the truth, the official record that would condemn a man. But Dietrich knew the real truth of this room was not written in ink. It was absorbed by the stones and held in the silence. A silence he was once again left alone with. But solitude, as he was about to be reminded, was a familiar and almost comfortable companion, and it was far, far better than what was coming next, because a confession in private was always just the prelude to a spectacle in public. The sun has not yet risen. In a small, modest house on the edge of the city, the world is still wrapped in the cool grey quiet of the hour before dawn. This is a different kind of silence than the one in the dungeon. This silence is domestic. It's the gentle quiet of a home of slumbering peace. In a simple bed, a woman breathes softly. Beside her, Dietrich is already awake. He has been for some time. He lies still, watching the darkness in the room slowly soften into a faint, dusty light. On days like this, he always woke early. It was not a nervous energy that woke him, but a quiet internal shift, a preparation. He rises from the bed with practiced stillness, careful not to wake his wife. The floorboards are cold beneath his bare feet. In a basin of water left out from the night before, he washes his face. The shock of the cold is a familiar and welcome sensation. It cuts through the lingering tendrils of sleep and brings a sharp, clean focus to the mind. This is his first ritual of the day, a small private baptism to wash away the man who slept and prepare for the man who must work. He eats a simple breakfast alone in the quiet of his main room. A thick slice of dark bread, a small piece of hard cheese. He eats slowly, deliberately. There is no pleasure in it, only fuel. He's not a man indulging in a meal. He's a machine being readied for its function. Outside, the city is beginning to stir. He can hear the distant clang of an early blacksmith, the crowing of a rooster, and soon the faint warm smell of baking bread will drift from the ovens in the city centre. The irony today of all days is not lost on him. The world continues its simple, honourable routines, unaware and uncaring of the grim interruption scheduled for its morning. This was Dietrich, the man in the quiet sanctuary of his home, but today the city did not require the man. It required the symbol. It required the monster. And becoming the monster was a process. After his meal, he moves to a large iron-banded chest that sits in the corner of the room. It is the only piece of furniture he keeps locked. He opens it, and the air is immediately filled with the scent of folded wool and cedar. This is his other wardrobe. He bypasses his everyday tunics and pulls out a set of clothes folded with meticulous care. They are all black, a simple heavy tunic, trousers, and a pair of soft leather boots. They're clean, well-maintained, and utterly devoid of any ornament. This is his uniform. And then he takes out the final piece, the hood. It is made of the same thick black wool as the tunic. It's a simple bag with 2 roughly cut holes for the eyes. He holds it for a moment. It wasn't just a piece of cloth to hide his face. It was a tool of transformation. When he wore his own face, he was Dietrich, a man people feared and avoided. But when he pulled this hood over his head, he ceased to be a man at all. He became an office, an anonymous, terrifying instrument of the law. It was both a shield that protected him from the glares of the crowd, and a cage that trapped him in his role. It was, he often thought with a sliver of grim humour, the most effective do not disturb sign ever invented. He doesn't put it on yet. That comes later. First there is the other tool. Beneath the black clothes in the chest lies a long leather-wrapped object. He lifts it out. It is heavy, perfectly balanced. He unwraps the leather to reveal the blade. This is not a soldier's sword made for hacking and thrusting. This is an executioner's sword. The blade is long, wide, and flat with no point at its end. Its only purpose is to cut. It is a masterpiece of the swordsmith's art, forged from the finest steel, and it is Dietrich's most terrible and prized possession. He carries it to the low light of the window and inspects the edge, running his thumb almost to the blade, feeling the keenness of it in the air just above the metal. He takes pride in its sharpness. A clean cut was the mark of his skill. It was the only form of mercy he was permitted to offer a final swift end that prevented a gruesome botched spectacle. A dull blade was the sign of an amateur, a butcher. And Dietrich, whatever else he was no butcher. He was a master of his grim craft. A craft he was now required to perform in front of the entire city. Satisfied, he wraps the sword again and tucks it under his arm. He pulls on the black boots, and finally, just before leaving, he slips the hood into his belt. It is time. He steps out of his front door into the morning. The sun is now rising, casting long, cool shadows across the cobbled streets. The air is alive with the business of the day. But as Dietrich begins to walk, a strange phenomenon occurs. The noise of the city seems to move away from him. He walks in a bubble of silence. People see him, the tall figure in black, the grim purpose in his stride, and they stop talking. They press themselves against walls. They pull their children close. They avert their eyes, but their attention is entirely on him. He is the dark star around which the morning now revolves. He feels their fear, their morbid curiosity like a change in the weather. He does not look at them. His gaze is fixed ahead on the main square. This is his commute. The murmur of the crowd grows louder as he approaches the square. It's a holiday atmosphere, but a grim one. Hundreds of people have gathered, jostling for the best view. For them, this is a spectacle, a piece of civic theatre, a stern lesson, and a bit of thrilling entertainment all rolled into one. For Dietrich, it is just the workplace. In the centre of the square stands the scaffold. It's a simple, newly built wooden platform about 5 feet high. It smells of fresh-cut pine and sawdust. He ascends the few steps and the crowd's murmur drops to a hush. He's on stage now. He ignores the sea of faces and does his final checks. He tests the stability of the platform with his weight. He inspects the block, a thick, solid piece of oak set firmly in the centre. He is a stage manager, ensuring everything is perfect for the final act. He sees the other actors taking their places. Magistrate Ulrich looking stern and important in his finest robes. The priest clutching a large wooden cross, his face pale. The city guard forming a wide circle around the platform, their halberds glinting in the morning sun. Dietrich stands alone on the platform waiting. The sword is still wrapped at his side. The hood is still tucked in his belt. He is the calm eye in the centre of a growing storm of public anticipation. The stage is set, the actors are in place, and the audience is restless. All that is missing is the final key performer in this tragic play. And then he hears it. The sound he's been waiting for. The low rumble of wooden wheels on cobblestone and the slow rhythmic clopping of a horse's hooves. The cart is coming. The cart emerges into the square. It moves at a funeral's pace, parting the sea of onlookers. It's a simple, functional farm cart, not a chariot of judgment, which somehow makes the scene even more pathetic. In it sits Klaus the baker, dressed in a simple white penitent's shirt. His hands are bound in front of him. He is not weeping or fighting. A strange sort of calm has settled over him, the profound, hollow resignation of a man who has walked through the door of despair and found nothing on the other side. Beside him, a portly priest murmurs prayers from a small worn book, his voice a low, monotonous drone that is mostly lost in the noise of the crowd. Klaus does not seem to hear him. His eyes are wide, scanning the hundreds of faces that have come to watch him die. What does he see in that moment? A blur of morbid curiosity. Perhaps the faces of people who once bought bread from him, who shared a joke or commented on the weather. Now they just stare. He is no longer Klaus the baker, a neighbour, a man. He is a symbol, an effigy of heresy, the unwilling star of a play he never auditioned for. The cart halts at the base of the scaffold. The show is about to begin. The guards help Klaus down his legs unsteady on the solid ground after the rocking of the cart. They lead him up the wooden steps. Each step creaks a small lonely sound in the vast open square. As he reaches the platform, a hush falls over the crowd. Magistrate Ulrich, revelling in his role as the master of ceremonies, steps forward. He unrolls yet another scroll. The bureaucracy of death is endless, and reads the final sentence. His voice booms across the square, theatrical and self-satisfied. He lists the crimes, the confession, and the judgment of the court, concluding with the flourish, and is hereby sentenced to death by the sword for the purification of the city and the salvation of his own immortal soul. The magistrate Ulrich was enjoying the sound of his own voice a little too much this morning, Dietrich thought. He always did. When the proclamation is finished, the priest steps forward to offer Klaus a final chance to speak, to offer a final public confession, a warning to others. But Klaus just looks out, his eyes vacant. He shakes his head slowly. What is there left to say? He had already given them their words in the darkness below. The priest then turns to the crowd and begins a long winding prayer for the condemned man's soul. He speaks of mercy, damnation, and the fires of hell, his voice rising and falling in a practiced cadence. Dietrich watches impassive. The priest is always the most unpredictable part of the schedule. Some were quick and merciful. Others, like this one, saw it as an opportunity for a full sermon. Dietrich stands perfectly still, a black statue of patience. He is not paid by the hour. The sun climbs higher in the sky. A vendor on the edge of the square sells roasted nuts. A child perched on her father's shoulders for a better view points a sticky finger. The words of priests and politicians filled the air, but they were just noise. The true conversation now was a silent one between two men on a wooden stage, one who was about to leave the world and one whose job it was to open the door. Finally, the prayer concludes. The priest makes the sign of the cross over Klaus's head and steps back, his duty done. Now it is Dietrich's turn. He takes a single step forward and the energy of the crowd shifts. This is what they came for. This is the moment. He reaches to his belt and pulls out the black hood. With a single fluid motion, he draws it over his head. His world narrows instantly. The vast square, the sea of faces, the sky above it all vanishes, replaced by the small, focused frame of the eye slits. The roar of the crowd becomes a muffled hum. His own breathing is suddenly loud in his ears. He is no longer Dietrich. He is the Scharfrichter. He steps to Klaus's side. The baker flinches but does not resist. Dietrich's movements are firm, gentle, and utterly impersonal. He is a doctor positioning a patient for a difficult but necessary procedure. He guides Klaus to his knees before the thick oak block. He gently pushes the man's head forward so his neck is exposed, resting on the wood. He pulls the collar of the white shirt down. His hands are steady. There is no anger here, no hatred. There is only a profound functional focus. He might whisper a single practical instruction, his voice a low rasp that only the condemned man can hear. Stay still. His part of the ritual is done. He takes 3 steps back. He reaches for the leather-wrapped sword at his side. As he unwraps it, the crowd lets out a collective hungry gasp. The morning sun catches the wide, polished steel blade, and it flashes with a brilliant, terrible light that dances across the square. Now the final act. This is his art. He takes his stance, his feet planted firmly on the wooden platform. He holds the heavy sword in both hands, feeling its familiar weight, its perfect balance. He is not thinking of the man kneeling before him. He is thinking of the physics, the arc, the angle, the precise point on the blade that must connect the follow-through. It is a complex full-body motion, a deadly dance he has practiced 1,000 times in his mind and 12 times in reality. He raises the sword. He holds it high, the steel glinting against the blue sky. For a heartbeat, the entire world seems to freeze. The crowd holds its breath. The murmur of the city, the rustle of the wind, the cry of the birds, it all ceases. A perfect absolute silence descends upon the square. The only thing moving is the sun climbing higher. The sword reaches the apex of its arc. A low, unified sigh escapes from the crowd, a sound of tension released. A flock of pigeons, startled by the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure, explodes from a nearby rooftop, their wings beating frantically against the newly noisy air. Dietrich stands perfectly still for a count of 3, the tip of his sword now resting on the wooden scaffold. This is his signature, the mark of a job done well. The silence that preceded the blow and the lack of any unseemly commotion after it is his performance review. It was a good death, a professional success. Slowly, methodically, he begins the final ritual. He takes a cloth from his belt and carefully wipes the blade clean, though it barely needs it. He wraps the sword in its leather sheath. He reaches up and pulls the hood from his head. The bright, loud world rushes back in. He blinks in the sudden sunlight Dietrich once more. The show is over. The crowd begins to break up their voices, rising in a babble of excited, nervous chatter. They have seen what they came to see. They have been given their lesson and their spectacle. Now they will return to their bakeries, their workshops, their homes, taking with them the memory of the show. But for Dietrich, the job was not quite over. The body must be dealt with, a task for his assistants. The sword must be taken home and cleaned more thoroughly. But more than that, he had to walk back through the city, no longer a fearsome anonymous symbol, but just a man again carrying his terrible tool. And sometimes that was the hardest part of the journey. The play is over. Dietrich steps down from the scaffold, his boot making a dull thud on the packed earth of the square. Behind him on the platform, his assistants' men, who share a sliver of his dishonourable status, begin the grim practical work of clearing the stage. That is their job, not his. His role in the public eye is complete. He is no longer the centre of the spectacle. Now his only task is to disappear. The sword, which moments ago was an object of terrifying power, a symbol of ultimate authority, is now just an awkward and heavy piece of steel he has to carry home. He wraps it in its leather sheath, the motion practiced and final. With the sword under his arm, he turns his back on the scaffold and begins to walk. If the walk to the square was a journey into a vortex of silence, the walk back is something else entirely. The energy has changed. The morbid excitement of the crowd has curdled into a more personal, superstitious dread. Before he was a symbol of what was to come. Now he is a reminder of what has just been done. As he moves the red sea parts before him once more, but this time it is different. It is faster, more frantic. People who had been craning their necks to see him now almost trip over themselves to get out of his way. Mothers who had lifted their children up for a better view now snatch them back, shielding their eyes and whispering warnings. He was the city's most recognizable figure, a true celebrity. His celebrity, however, came with the unique perk that no one would ever ask for his autograph or clap him on the back for a job well done. His success was measured in the radius of the emptiness that surrounded him. He walks through the market square a ghost at his own city's feast. The sensory world, which had been narrowed to the point of a sword, now rushes back in. He smells the sharp tang of fresh cheese from a merchant's stall, the sweet scent of hay, the earthy smell of livestock. He hears the laughter of 2 women haggling over fabric, the sharp cry of a child who has dropped a toy. He sees life in all its messy, vibrant and mundane glory. He sees it, hears it, and smells it. But can he ever truly touch it again? Or is the stain of his office a permanent dye, rendering him forever a spectator to the warmth of the world? He passes a tavern, the sound of hearty laughter spilling out from its open door. He has never been inside. He passes the bakery, now shuttered, its ovens cold. A new, more tragic silence emanates from that particular shop today. Each step is a reminder of the invisible wall that separates him from the community he is paid to protect. He is the shepherd who can never enter the fold. This journey, this short walk of a few hundred paces, is often the longest and most difficult part of his day. The work itself, as grim as it is, has a clear and defined purpose. It has rules, rituals, a beginning and an end. It is this part, the reintegration, the attempt to cross back over the threshold, from symbol to man that is filled with a quiet, ambiguous agony. He walks on his face a neutral mask, his eyes fixed on the familiar sight of his own street at the edge of town. Finally, he reaches his door. He does not knock. He has his own key. The sound of the lock turning is followed by the immense relief of stepping across his own threshold and barring the door behind him. He leans against the solid wood for a moment, the sounds of the city fading into a distant murmur. He is home. He is safe. He is in his sanctuary. The silence inside is profound, a welcoming balm after the noise of the crowd and the internal noise of his work. His wife Anna is there. She stands by the hearth, her back to him. She does not turn when he enters. She doesn't speak. There are no questions. There are never any questions. What could she possibly ask? Did you have a good day at the office, dear? Instead, their communication exists in a silent, practiced ritual, a choreography of shared understanding honed over years of navigating this strange life. On the table, a large ceramic basin of hot, steaming water is already waiting. Beside it are clean cloths and a bar of harsh lye soap. He says nothing. He simply places the wrapped sword carefully on the mantle it must be tended to first, and moves to the basin. This is the second ritual of the day, the cleansing. He strips off the black tunic and trousers, the uniform of the Scharfrichter. He drops them into a heap on the floor. He begins to wash, scrubbing his hands, his arms, his face, his neck. The water is hot, almost scalping, but the sensation is one of purification. He's not just washing away the dust and sweat of the square. He's trying to wash away the intangible residue of the day, the scent of the crowd, the weight of their stares, the phantom feel of the sword in his hands. He's washing away the executioner, hoping to find Dietrich underneath. When he is done, he dries himself and puts on a simple homespun tunic, the clothes of a husband of a man who lives in a small house on the edge of town. He is clean. He is home. The day's public work is done. But as he sits in the quiet of his own home, the silence is different now. The events of the day, now locked away by the barred door, and the cleansing ritual have a way of echoing in the quietest corners of the mind. The work was over, but the memory of it had just begun its long, slow patrol through the fortress of his thoughts. The house is quiet. The city outside is settling into the rhythms of evening. The day's terrible public duty is done, the cleansing ritual complete. All that is left is the final task, the one that is, in its own way, the most intimate. He sits not at his table, but on a low stool by the hearth, the great sword laid across his knees. He begins the slow, methodical process of oiling the blade. He works with a focused tenderness, a drop of fine oil, a soft leather cloth, and slow circular motions from the hilt to the flat, pointless tip. This is not the hurried wipe-down of the scaffold. This is a conversation. This is a quiet communion with the object that defines his life. A sword is just an object of steel and wood, a tool like any other. But this sword was a book of memories, and every time he polished its familiar cold surface, a new page seemed to turn in his mind. The feel of the heavy balanced steel in his hand sends a ripple back through time. He's no longer a man in his prime, but a boy of 12 standing in this very room. He is small for his age, watching his father perform this same ritual. His father, a larger, quieter, sadder version of himself, with the same powerful hands and the same haunted look in his eyes after a long day's work. For weeks the boy Dietrich had asked to hold the sword, and for weeks his father had refused, and then one evening, without a word, his father held it out to him, hilt first. Dietrich remembered the shock of it, the impossible weight that nearly pulled him over. It felt less like a sword and more like an anchor, a piece of a fallen star, impossibly dense and filled with a cold, terrible purpose. His friends were learning how to plane wood or shoe a horse. Dietrich's apprenticeship, he was beginning to understand, was in the science of the clean severance. The lessons began not with the blade, but with a heavy balanced broomstick. In the small private yard behind their house, his father would drill him on the stance, the grip, the pivot of the hips, the arc of the swing. It was a grotesque and melancholy parody of a normal father-son activity. It was their version of teaching a son to fish or to throw a ball, only the ultimate catch was far, far grimmer. No, his father's voice would rumble, stopping him mid-swing. "You are angry. I can see it in your shoulders. The sword is not a hammer for your rage. The anger is for the crowd, for the judges. For you, there can only be the work." He would adjust Dietrich's grip. "It is a key. Your job is only to turn it. Smoothly. Quietly." Do you understand? Dietrich at 12 did not understand. Not really. But he nodded anyway. He learned the physics of the blade, the geometry of the swing. He learned that a swift execution was not about strength, but about an almost delicate precision, about letting the sword's own weight do the work. But the hardest lessons, the ones that truly mattered, had nothing to do with the body. They had to do with the mind. One evening after a particularly frustrating lesson, his father had not taken out the broomstick. He had taken out the hood. He sat Dietrich down at this very table. This, his father had said, his voice low and serious, is the most important tool you will ever own. More important than the sword. He had explained that the hood was not to hide from the crowd, nor was it to frighten the condemned. It was to protect the executioner from himself. When you pull this on, his father said, laying the rough black cloth on the table, Dietrich is gone. The man who loves his wife, who enjoys the taste of fresh bread, who feels the sun on his face that man is not on the scaffold. The scaffold is for the Scharfrichter. It is an office of the state. It is a thing, not a man. The hood is the door between the two. When you leave the house, you put it on. When you come home, you take it off. And you leave everything that happened in between with the hood. Let it carry the weight. It is made of thick cloth for a reason. The memory fades, the boy replaced by the man. Dietrich looks down at his own hands holding the cloth polishing the steel. His father's hands. He has become what he was raised to be. He has learned his lessons well. The fortress inside his mind is strong, its walls thick, its gates barred. He finishes his work. The sword is clean, gleaming with a soft oily sheen in the firelight. He wraps it once more in its leather sheath and carries it to the iron-banded chest. He lays it in its place beside the folded black uniform. He closes the lid, the sound of the heavy wood echoing softly in the quiet room. He locks it. The work and the memories of the work are put away for the night. The house is still. Evening has turned to night. He is just Dietrich, a man in a quiet house at the end of a long day. But the silence is filled with the ghosts of his father's words, the echo of a lesson learned so long ago. He had learned how to build a fortress to protect himself. He had learned to let the hood carry the weight. But as he stared into the dying embers of the fire, the final unspoken question that his father never answered always remained. What was he protecting himself from? The judgment of the world, or the quiet, relentless judgment of himself? Morning broke, not with the gentle blush of dawn, but with a harsh white glare that offered no forgiveness. Silas was already gone, having ridden out before sunrise to mend a distant fence line, his anger a foul taste left in the air. He had left her with a list of supplies to be fetched from town and a single cold coin, a leash and a command. The journey to town was a penance. The old buckboard rattled over the rutted track, each jolt a sharp reminder of the bruise on her arm, of the shattered bird on her hearth. The sky was a vast, empty blue canvas. Indifferent. The world felt stripped bare, revealing only the truth of her isolation. She kept her head down as she tied the horse to the hitching post outside the mercantile, avoiding the curious, pitying glances from the few faces she passed. They knew. In a town this small, everyone knew Silas's temper. They saw her as his property, a sad, broken thing. The mercantile smelled of coffee beans, oiled leather, and the sweet, cloying scent of licorice in a jar by the counter. It was a cave of earthly comforts that felt a world away from her own. She moved through the aisles with the quiet efficiency of a ghost gathering flour salt beans. Her list was almost complete. All that remained was a 50-pound sack of flour, a weight that seemed insurmountable. She wrapped her arms around it, her thin frame straining with the effort. She heaved. The sack barely lifted before slipping from her grasp, thudding to the floorboards with a soft explosion of white dust that coated her worn boots. A quiet curse died on her lips. She would have to ask the proprietor for help, an act that felt like a surrender. "Here, let me get that for you, Mom." The voice was deep and calm. It held no judgment, no pity. Just a simple offer of help. Alara froze, then slowly looked up. A man stood there, tall but not imposing like Silas. His clothes were worn from work, his face weathered by the sun, but his eyes were kind. It was a kindness so unexpected it felt like a physical blow. Behind him, a whirlwind of the life erupted. Two young boys were wrestling over a wooden toy, their mock-serious grunts and giggles, filling the store with a joyful chaos. A little girl with hair the colour of corn silk and his same kind eyes tugged on his sleeve. "Pa, can we get licorice, please?" she pleaded. The man smiled down at his daughter, a genuine easy smile that transformed his tired face. "In a minute, Sparrow. Let's help the lady first." He turned back to Alara, and with one effortless motion he lifted the heavy sack and settled it into her arms. "It's heavier than it looks." "Thank you, sir." Alara managed her voice a reedy whisper she barely recognized as her own. She clutched the sack to her chest, its weight a strange solid comfort. The little girl looked at her, her head cocked. "Your dress is dusty," she said, with the frank, innocent cruelty of a child. "Hush now, Sarah," the man chided gently. He tipped his hat to Alara. "Jacob Blackwood," he said by way of introduction. "A pleasure, ma'am." He did not ask her name. He did not linger. He simply gathered his loud, vibrant children, paid for his own supplies and their licorice, and was gone, leaving behind an echo of laughter and a profound, aching silence. Alara stood frozen for a long moment, the flour sack heavy in her arms, her heart hammering a wild, unfamiliar rhythm. The brief encounter had torn a hole in the grey fabric of her world, letting in a blinding shaft of light. It showed her everything she didn't have. Everything she had forgotten was possible. Warmth, laughter, a gentle voice, the easy touch of a father's hand on a child's head. The ride home was a blur of confused, dangerous emotions. The kindness of the stranger Jacob Blackwood had planted a seed in the barren soil of her heart, a seed of hope, and hope was the most dangerous thing of all. When she arrived, the house felt colder, the silence more oppressive. The broken bird on the hearth seemed to mock her. She put the supplies away, her movements once again mechanical, but her mind was racing. Silas returned as dusk bled purple and orange across the plains. He was in a foul mood. A calf had been lost to coyotes. He slammed the door and threw his gloves on the table, his glare sweeping the room, looking for a fault, a reason. "Henderson mentioned you were in town," he said, his voice flat. "Said you were talking to Blackwood." Alara's blood ran cold. "He helped me with the flour sack, Silas. That is all. That man has everything." Silas spat, his voice thick with a sudden venomous jealousy. "Land that gives a wife that breeds, and he looks at you. What could he possibly see in a dried-up husk like you?" He advanced on her, his shadow creeping up the wall. "Did you like it? A new man speaking to you. Did it make you feel like a real woman for a minute?" She backed away until her shoulders hit the cold wall. She saw the storm in his eyes, the familiar, terrifying darkness, the fragile seed of hope that had sprouted in the mercantile withered under his hateful glare. The light was gone. The cage door had slammed shut once more, but the memory remained, an echo of a kinder world, a world where a man's touch could be gentle. And as he raised his hand, Alara closed her eyes, but this time it was not Jacob's face she saw in her mind. It was the open, unforgiving plains, and for the first time they did not look like a cage. They looked like a choice. It is not a loud sound. It is a soft, hesitant, almost desperate tapping, and it does not come from the front door, the thick oak door that faces the city and receives official summons. It comes from the small, discreet door at the back of the house, the one that opens onto a dark, narrow alleyway. This is not the knock of the law nor of a neighbour. It is the sound of desperation. The sound of someone who has exhausted all honourable options and has finally reluctantly arrived at the dishonourable one. Dietrich's wife Anna looks up from her mending, a flicker of concern in her eyes. On a day like this, a day of public death, they rarely have visitors. But Dietrich's expression doesn't change. It is one of weary resignation. He knows this sound. He has heard it before. Without a word, he moves to the back door, lifts the simple wooden latch, and opens it a crack. Huddled in the darkness are a man and a woman, their faces etched with panic. They are simple farming folk, their clothes coarse, their hands rough with work. The man holds a small bundle wrapped in a woolen blanket. A low whimpering sound comes from within it. It's their son, a boy of no more than 10. "Please, Scharfrichter." The man stammers the title, falling from his lips like a stone. He cannot bring himself to look Dietrich in the eye, instead, staring at a point somewhere near his chest. It's his arm. He fell from the apple tree. The barber surgeon, he said he cannot fix it. He said, "Only you." The irony was so thick you could almost taste it. The city's barber surgeon, an honourable man, was a butcher of hair and little more. When it came to the true intricate architecture of the human body, he was a frightened amateur. And so in their moment of greatest need, they had to come to the one man whose entire profession was built on deconstructing that very architecture. They had come to the expert. Dietrich says nothing. He simply opens the door wider, a silent invitation. The couple scurries inside, blinking in the relative brightness of the hearth fire, clutching their son as if the very air in this house might be poisonous. Dietrich leads them not to his main table, but to a small partitioned area at the side of the room. It is his other workshop. There is no rack here, no chains. There is only a plain wooden table, scrubbed clean, and a shelf with linen bandages, wooden splints, and a few small jars of herbal salves. The father lays the boy on the table. The child is pale with pain and fear, his left arm bent at a sickening unnatural angle just below the elbow. He stares at Dietrich with wide, terrified eyes. This was the man from the stories the monster parents whispered about to frighten their children into obedience. And now that monster's hands were reaching for him. How could a monster have hands that were so calm? Dietrich's touch is surprisingly light. He probes the arm gently, his fingers moving with an unnerving expertise. He can feel the broken ends of the bones grating against each other beneath the skin. He assesses the swelling, the angle of the break. He is no longer the executioner. He has become something else. He is the anatomist, the diagnostician, the reluctant specialist in human frailty. It is a clean break. Dietrich says, his voice a low, steady rumble. It's the first time he has spoken. But it must be set now before the swelling gets worse. He looks at the parents who are hovering, wringing their hands. I will need your help. You must hold him still. Hold his shoulder and his body. Do not let him move, no matter what he does. Do you understand? They nod, their faces grim with determination. The mother moves to the boy's head, stroking his hair and whispering soft, soothing words that are completely at odds with the terror in her own eyes. The father takes a firm grip on his son's shoulder and torso. The boy begins to cry, a high, thin sound of fear. Dietrich takes a moment to prepare. He lays out 2 perfectly sized wooden splints and several long strips of linen. He takes a deep breath, letting it out slowly. He is centering himself just as he did on the scaffold, but for a vastly different purpose. He places one hand on the boy's upper arm just above the break and the other on his wrist. He looks at the father and gives a single sharp nod. Then, with a motion that is both swift and immensely powerful, he pulls and twists. A wet, sickening click echoes in the quiet room. It is a sound of profound violence, the sound of bone finding its proper home. The boy lets out a single piercing shriek of agony that is instantly muffled as his mother presses his face into her shoulder. The shriek is followed by a torrent of ragged, heartbroken sobs, and then just as quickly the sobs begin to subside, replaced by whimpers of exhaustion and a dawning relief. The terrible grinding pain is gone. Dietrich, his face impassive, is already at work, his fingers moving deftly as he binds the arm between the 2 wooden splints, wrapping it tightly and securely with the linen bandages. His work is neat, efficient, and perfect. He steps back. The procedure is over. The parents stare at their son's now straight, splinted arm, then at Dietrich, their faces a canvas of stunned disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. The father fumbles inside his tunic and pulls out a small worn leather pouch. It clinks with the sound of a few coins. He holds it out, his hand trembling. "We do not have much," he begins. Dietrich looks at the pouch, then at the man's desperate face. He reaches out and instead of taking the whole pouch, he plucks just 2 small copper coins from the man's palm. It is a pittance, far less than any physician would charge. He closes his hand around them. The father looks confused but also immensely relieved. "Thank you," he whispers the words thick with emotion. "God bless you." The irony of a man invoking God's blessing upon the city's official executioner hangs in the air unspoken by all. They gather their son, who is now half asleep from the shock and the relief, and Dietrich shows them to the door. They slip out into the night as quietly as they came, their footsteps fading down the alley. Dietrich closes the door and leans against it for a moment. He opens his hand and looks at the 2 small copper coins in his palm. They are warm from the farmer's hand. They feel different from the cold, heavy silver he was paid earlier in the day for his other work. One was the price of a life ended. This perhaps was the price of a life restored. He closed his hand around them, the metal a small solid weight in his palm, and he was once again left alone in the silence of his home, a man of impossible and weary contradictions. The public spectacle was over, and the secret healing was done. Now truly the day was at an end. He stands there for a long moment, the silence of the house settling around him like a familiar cloak. The farmer's footsteps have long since faded into the night. All that remains is the faint warmth of the 2 copper coins in his hand. He walks slowly from the door to the hearth, his gaze drifting from the coppers in his palm to the small heavy leather pouch resting on the mantel, the payment from the city. He sinks onto the low stool, watching the last of the embers glow and fade. The great roaring fire of the day has dwindled to this, and as he watches, he opens his hand, comparing the two sets of currency in his mind. In the pouch on the mantel lies the cold, heavy silver, the price of a life ended, a wage paid in fear, coins that any merchant would accept with a shudder. In his palm lie two simple copper coins, the price of a life restored, a gift paid in gratitude coins that held the warmth of a desperate father's hand. They were both payments for a day's work. Both were earned through his unique and terrible knowledge of the human body. One was the wage of the Scharfrichter, the other was the fee for the healer. Can a life be balanced like this, a pouch of silver on one side, a handful of copper on the other? Dietrich knew the scales of justice and of memory were far more mysterious. They did not balance. They simply were. A life of strange, grim and contradictory truths. He is so lost in these thoughts, in the dying dance of the embers, that he doesn't hear his wife Anna approach. He only feels her presence as she lays a hand gently on his shoulder. It is a simple gesture, but it is enough to pull him back from the ghosts of the past and anchor him firmly in the warm, quiet present. He looks up at her. In the soft, flickering light, her face is calm. There is no judgment in her eyes, no fear. In this house with her, he is not the Scharfrichter. He is not the spectre from the scaffold. He is just Dietrich, her husband. He closes his fingers over the two copper coins, a small secret warmth. Hannah offers him a simple earthenware cup, warm to the touch. It is filled with an infusion of herbs from her small garden chamomile and lavender scents of peace and sleep. He takes it without a word and drinks. The warmth spreads through his chest, a gentle countercurrent to the cold he so often felt in his soul. This is their ritual, her quiet, constant act of care, her way of leading him home, not just to their house, but back to himself. When the cup is empty, he places it on the hearth. A deep, profound weariness settles over him. It is not the ache of tired muscles, but the heavy fatigue of the spirit of a man who has carried a terrible weight all day. Anna understands. She helps him to his feet, and together they move to their simple bed in the alcove. He lies down, the straw mattress rustling softly beneath him. He closes his eyes. He lets the day fall away. The faces in the crowd, the glint of the sword, the quiet judgment. He lets it all dissolve into the great quiet darkness behind his eyes. The fortress of his mind, its duty done, finally lowers its gates for the night. And now, we leave him there. We leave that world of cold stone and hard justice, of silent crowds and heavy burdens. We let the torchlight flicker and die. We let the 15th century fade back into the mists of time where it belongs. Dietrich's story for tonight is over. The ghosts of the past are quiet now, and all that is left is you, here in the safety and the quiet of your own room. His bed was a simple straw mattress, a brief refuge in a harsh world. Your bed is a sanctuary of softness and warmth. The only judgment here is the gentle, heavy pull of your own eyelids. The only sentence is the one that leads to dreams. The story is finished. There are no crowds to face, no heavy swords to lift. There is only the feeling of the blankets around you, the gentle weight of your head on the pillow, the simple rhythmic sound of your own breathing. So let the embers of the story fade completely. Let the memory of Dietrich and his world drift away like smoke on the night air. There is nothing left to hold on to, nothing left to do, only rest.